for an Italian learning English, what sounds would you say that a native Italian speaker should focus on to reduce their accent when improving their English?
Mm. Yeah, so it's very different from what I would say to a Spanish speaker, for example. Now, that might be surprising. You look at Italian and Spanish, and they're very similar languages. But the thing is, Italian has a lot of consonants that English has too, and Spanish does not have. So, for example, a Spanish speaker struggles to differentiate between B and V. It's very, very difficult for them. They have the B, they have the V that are very similar, but they don't have V. Italians, on the other hand, have that other V sound. So a V is not going to be a problem for an Italian. So what I find that Italians struggle with more is actually the rhythm and intonation and the vowels, but usually not the consonants so much. Now, the reason for that is that Italian only has about 7 vowels, which is still more than Spanish, but not nearly like what we have in English, which of course varies depending on the accent, as I'm sure you know. It really depends, but we definitely have more than 7, no matter what. So I would say that they struggle with, on average, almost every vowel they need to relearn. And a lot of people bring up E versus I. They bring up things like ah versus but I really think that for them to learn to really sound like they speak with a good accent, they should learn all of the vowels from scratch.
Wow. Okay, I would have thought that Spanish and Italians would have been the same.
Mm,
It's
very
really
different.
fascinating to hear that. So I work with a
Yeah.
lot of people who like speak Spanish as a first language, so I would have kind of thought, oh, they're probably the same. But you're right, even with the rhythm, right? Like
Mm.
thinking of the Italian rhythm of how they speak. Can you tell me more about that actually?
Yeah. So Italians tend to either they speak English very, very flat because they don't know when it can go up or when it can go down, or it goes up and down a lot, but in the wrong places. So sometimes there will be glides onto a certain word or onto a certain syllable instead of just hitting one pitch per syllable, which is what we tend to do in English. Now, of course, in English, it varies. As you get to the end of a sentence, there tends to be more of a variation in pitch on one syllable. But typically, it's one musical note per syllable in English, whereas in Italian, there's a bit more of a glide on one syllable. So that can be pretty tricky. They need to know which words they should emphasize and which words they should not emphasize. So in English, we categorize words. On one hand, we have the function words, they're just grammatical, we need to say them quickly. Then we have the content words that are more meaningful that we have to slow down on. So for them, it's very tricky to remember to sort out what category of word they're saying and remember which ones they can stress and can't stress.
Yeah, and it's something that we just do naturally as English speakers, right? So
Yep.
yeah. Oh my goodness. That's It's just also fascinating for me. So let's say you are teaching Italians or like you're an sorry, an English teacher listening, saying, well, what advice would you give me to like properly equip Italians to reduce their accent? What
Mm.
advice would you give?
Well, so another thing that Italians do that I think is what people think of first is they make the consonants very strong. So they have a lot of the same consonants we have, but our consonants are a bit weaker because our vowels stand out more. So I think that before they can learn the vowels well, they have to learn how to reduce the consonants. So they have to learn how to, for example, if you have a word ending in a group of consonants, they try to pronounce everything perfectly. Or if you have an N followed by another consonant, for example, incentive, an Italian might say incentive with a strong N there where we wouldn't.
Wow. Do you have another example? I'm so
Sure.
intrigued by this.
Let me see. Let's see. Consonant, they might say consonant or consonant, something like that. The ends will be a little bit stronger, whereas we tend to reduce them. So I'm actually taking Italian accent classes at the same time while I have clients that speak Italian. And my Italian accent coach is always telling me I don't pronounce my N's enough before a consonant in Italian. So then that automatically made me hear this even more in my students. Oh, your N's, wow, they're so strong before other consonants. We don't do that. So it's interesting.
Okay, wow. So if you were to hear a student over pronouncing or just kind of like stressing the N too much or a consonant, would you just say like try not to say it with too much stress? Is that kind of how you would train them?
Yeah, so it really depends on what the consonant is, too. So if it's an M, sometimes it can also have to do with the tightness in the lips. So, for example, yesterday I was going over a word with a Russian speaker, but the same thing applies to Italians. When you say mama, they tend to increase the duration of the M because there's so much tightness in the lips when they say it. So they don't do mama, mama. It's mama. So the M lasts a longer amount of time. So I tell them you need to decrease the duration, you need to do it faster, and you need to relax the lips. In the case of the N, the tongue needs to make the movement quicker and quickly move into the next sound faster.
Oh my goodness, my mind is so blown right now. Do you have anything else that you would like to add for an Italian speaker? Would you like me to go to the next language?
Um, so I think that once they practice reducing consonants, which you can do this by having someone give you a lot of feedback because sometimes they can't hear it if they're making a consonant strong because it's what they automatically do in their native language. So it's good to either have a friend or a coach that can point it out and tell you. And it's also good to record yourself a lot. And then you can listen back and try to only focus on hearing that detail in your speech. Because when you're looking for it, you're a lot more aware of it. So then when you're in a conversation, you're going to be able to correct yourself more easily.
Okay. And then I like how you said for them to record themselves, um, and then they would listen to it themselves. Do you feel like they should, how do I say this? Um, let's say they were listening to a native speaker and then they were shadowing. Would they or should they record both so that they can hear the comparison?
Yeah. So, for example, in my course, I have, by course, I mean just kind of the materials I give in the one on one sessions. I have audio recordings for all of the sounds with phrases going through them. And I have them listen to those just to kind of listen and repeat and train their ear. But at the same time, compare that with the way that they sound in their recordings. Are they being consistent with it? If they're not, they need to do it over. Um, but yeah, I think it can be very useful for them to hear a specific sentence or a specific phrase with that sound and then try to repeat the same one and record themselves doing it and then listen to it after. That can be very useful.
Yeah, I like that. I've done that in French once in a while. I cringe when I hear myself. Do you ever cringe when you hear yourself in another language? Or not really?
Yeah, in Spanish not so much because I've been speaking it for a while, but with Italian I've only been speaking it for 2 years, so a little bit. Yes.
Oh, no, that's cool. Do you ever find as well, because I'm speaking from experience, there are some times where I listen to myself like play back and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's horrible, or I can hear what I did incorrectly. But
Yeah.
then there are also some times where I feel like my ear can't fully like hear the difference. So I'm like, I'm saying it right, but I'm really not.
Mhm.
At what point do you think it's important to have like a native speaker review your recordings?
Mm. Um I think it's always ideal even if you have a very good accent in the language. So for example, I've been speaking Spanish since I was 14, so for a pretty long time. But I still have had some classes with a Spanish accent coach, even though I can get mistaken for a native speaker in the language, because you can be speaking it for years and years and years and think you have a great accent, but it's very hard to stay in the accent 100% of the time. There will always be little things here and there that you're missing, and you might not be able to hear it because you don't have the native speaker ear. So it is nice to always be able to get advice when you can.
Hmm.